any pride I might have in representing the only one of the four political parties for which one school system is an important issue is actually quite easily offset by the embarrassment of being the citizen of a province in which there is only one major political party willing to speak on this important issue. This shouldn't be a Green Party issue. This should be a multi-partisan issue. But when invitations were sent for today's event to members of the Liberal, PC, and NDP parties, as you probably heard from others here, we received a deafening silence. Dalton McGuinty famously said some years ago, quote, "We're not going there." Tim Hudak has told us he won't tinker with the system. And as to Andrea Horvath, well, of the four candidates for the leadership of the NDP party, which ultimately culminated in her win, of course, 3 supported Catholic school funding. Only Michael Prue, as Frank was just speaking about, championed the one school system solution. Prue came in last in that leadership contest. 3 of the 4 candidates for the leadership of the NDP party received their largest donation for campaign leadership funds from the Ontario Catholic Teachers Association. You can probably figure out which of the 4 candidates didn't receive any money from that Catholic teacher union. One thing is clear, the Liberal, PC, and NDP parties all support the homophobic, discriminatory, taxpayer-wasting, UN-slammed, bishop-run public Catholic school system. So you'd think, given their unquestioning support for the public funding of Catholic schools, politicians from these 3 parties would have some really excellent arguments to make in their defense. When questioned, what do politicians from these parties say in support of this system? Actually, they don't even bother trying to support the system. I've actually heard only 2 real responses. The most popular by far is the "it's in the Constitution." That's usually accompanied by the shrugging of the shoulders. Notice how that's not actually an argument in favor of the system. Instead, it's an attempt to avoid having to argue in favor of a system that has nothing in its favor. Things have changed since the British North America Act of 1867. The BNA Act called for 4 provinces. Now we have 10. The BNA Act had no provisions for fundamental freedoms. Those were added through the 1982 Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The BNA Act provided voting rights to only its male citizens. Now women vote and run for office. This last point is really worth dwelling on. Although those attempting to stop female suffrage would refer to men's voting rights as rights, we now know that in reality, that was a privilege. You see, a privilege is what we call a right when it's only available to a subset of our population. Things have changed since 1867. I said there were 2 common answers from politicians on the matter of Catholic schools. The first is to fall back on that supposed constitutional guarantee. The other is to say that the system is working just fine. We see that all the time. And I always wonder just who the system is working just fine for. The system is certainly working well for the bishops and the trustees, but how about the students and the teachers? Is the system working just fine for non-Catholic teachers, effectively barred from over 1/3 of all public teaching positions in this province? Or teachers who have lost their job for breaking some aspect of Catholic dogma? Is the system just fine for them? Is the system working just fine for the students who were dismissed from class for daring to advocate for pro-choice at a school-sanctioned and run pro-life rally? Is the system working just fine for parents who wish their kids to have access to the full range of books and literature, but have school boards banning books that are deemed inconsistent with Catholic dogma? Did the system work just fine for Mark Hall, who had to go through the burden of getting a court injunction to allow him to bring his same-sex partner to the prom against the explicit wishes of the school board? Did the system work just fine for students who wanted and deserved the best sex ed curriculum they can get? No. In a despicable move, the government capitulated to conservative Catholic bishops and shelved their new sex ed curriculum after a mere 2 days, depriving both Catholic school students and secular school students. Is the system working just fine for gay students who have their charter right to freedom of assembly explicitly trumped by the Catholic Board? No! The Toronto Catholic District School Board just a couple of weeks ago approved an amendment to their equity and inclusivity policy. From now on, whenever denominational privileges are in conflict with human rights requirements, the bishops overrule the government. quite apart from the specific case here, how can we have a system paid for by all of us taxpayers, but accountable not to the elected officials in Queen's Park, but to religious leaders only? The system isn't working just fine, and I'm getting very tired of hearing that it is. So the next time you hear either of these attempts to avoid actually defending Catholic school funding, please do what I do. Tell these politicians to stop avoiding the core questions and to do the right thing.
Yeah.
If this issue is still with us next year, I don't want to be here representing the only party with the guts to challenge the status quo and influential vested interests.